Well, there's no doubt that it will impact upon growth. In the current financial year, it will probably knock about half a percentage point off growth, but we'll bounce back really strongly because the Australian economy is strong, its underlying fundamentals are good, very strong employment growth, a strong investment pipeline. So I think we'll bounce back pretty quickly.
Australia has had 20 years recession-free. There are predictions that it might dip briefly into recession. How much are the floods and the cyclone going to contribute towards that?
Well, I couldn't rule that out, but as I said, the underlying fundamentals are strong. Australia has created something like 330,000 jobs in the past year alone. Yes, it will impact particularly in the March quarter, but I expect to see it bouncing back very strongly. We've got this very strong investment pipeline, particularly in resources, but more broadly than that. And we've also got underlying strength in our financial system. So the Australian economy is in pretty good nick. We took a hit, but we're going to bounce back.
Now, tourism, one of the pillars of Queensland's economy. How much is the perception that Queensland is underwater, particularly from overseas, doing more damage than the actual floods did themselves?
There's no doubt about that. When I was at the G20 some weeks ago, the impression overseas was that the whole state was underwater. The whole state was never underwater, and our great tourism industries were still operating even during the floods. Certainly some areas were affected on a temporary basis, but they're all operating. I mean, nothing beats Queensland. Nothing beats Queensland when it comes to the sun, when it comes to the reef, when it comes to the surf beaches, and when it comes to the rainforest. And we're open for business.
What about the strong dollar? That's not particularly helping, is it?
Well, certainly the strength of the dollar has an impact, but we've got a great product in Australia, and we are seeing still strong visits to the country. The countries they come from changes from time to time, but we've got a terrific tourist industry. But what we have to do is to get over the impression that the whole of the state was underwater. It wasn't. Our tourism industry is operating. There's great value for money out there at the moment, and I'd recommend people, particularly who are living in a European winter, come down to Queensland. Nothing beats it.
Mining sector also hit by the floods, one of the reasons for Australia's resilience and its relationship with China. How badly affected was the mining sector?
Well, certainly there was a temporary impact, and a couple of key rail lines were out of operation for some time, but they are recovering, and exports are certainly in great demand. We're getting very good prices, particularly for our coal in Queensland. There has been a bit of damage to repair, that's happening. But that strong investment pipeline is there, and there are still plenty of jobs in the resources sector, and we're exporting strongly.
And agriculture, is there a bit of a silver lining in that there was drought before, and now you've got all this water and rain? It's terribly good for the crops. Well,
certainly there's been an impact, but we had a very strong winter crop. There's been an impact on the summer crops, but from my observation as I move around the state, a lot of the state is recovering very quickly in the key agricultural industries. So I'm pretty optimistic about that.
How much is it going to cost to put right?
Well, it's certainly a very big expense. The floods will cost well over $5.6 billion, and of course we've had to fund that primarily through savings in our budget, but also through a temporary levy on income tax for 1 year.
How has the emergency levy gone down with the Australian taxpayer?
I think it's got the support of the community. People understand that we've got to rebuild. It's not just a question of what has happened to houses and to families, and that has been devastating, but it's the damage to public infrastructure. All of the roads and bridges and parks and ports and so on that were affected. And the Commonwealth in Australia is responsible for something like 75% of that expenditure. So a pretty big bill, but also a big bill for those people who lost their houses. So we've also been raising money on a voluntary basis, so people who may not necessarily have insurance or be underinsured can also get some assistance.
There was a problem about a lot of underinsurance. So are those people going to get their houses back?
Well, it will depend on their policy. It has brought forward a debate about flood insurance in Australia, how it operates. We're having a good hard look at that. It's also brought forward a debate about whether we need a natural disaster insurance scheme for the whole country, and we're looking at that as well.
Any lessons been learnt from it?
Well, I think there is, and I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. What we saw was an extraordinary response from our community to help their fellow citizens. People literally came from right around the country to volunteer. People were working with families they'd never met, We haven't seen in Australia the sort of response we saw on the ground in Brisbane, in southeast Queensland and in North Queensland, quite the way it happened on this occasion in many, many years.